Hello, everyone. My name is Piotr Florczyk. I am a professor at the University of Washington in Seattle, where I teach global literary studies. And in my former life, I was a world-ranked swimmer. I believe that a lot of the things that I do in terms of my publications, books and whatnot, that a lot of them stem from my previous life as a serious athlete. And what I'm getting at is this: I am ultimately a project-oriented person. I like doing projects. Being an athlete means that you train for a really long time in preparation for some big competition, right? And then after the competition, there's a little bit of a downtime. You get to rest, you get to relax, you go on vacation, and then you start all over again, right? You start training for the next year's big competition. And that's exactly how I work to this day. That's the reason why I like being a professor, because it's kind of like that too. You have the semester or the quarter and you work your butt off, right? During the quarter, and then you have some downtime and then you do it again. And so that's the same with books. The books I've done, they're all projects. They all came out of ideas that I wanted to explore when it comes to my original writing. And when it comes to my translations, a project would be translating so-and-so's poems with the idea of putting together a book of selected poems that would serve as an introduction, in most cases as an introduction, because for the most part, I've worked with poets, who hadn't been translated from Polish into English. So the idea was always like, okay, well, here's a new Polish poet that people in the English speaking countries should know or would be nice if they knew, right? So those are very kind of goal-oriented projects. With my own poetry, it's a little different because for the most part, the books of poems I've done, both in English and in Polish, they're not subject or theme driven. So that's a little different. They kind of come together organically. You write, and then you just kind of realize like, hey, I've got 40 poems. Maybe there's a book in here somewhere. And it was Robert Frost who said that if you have, I forget the exact number he used, but say if you have 28 poems, then the book should be poem number 29. And that's very true. I kind of agree with that. And so, but having said that, it was always kind of a decision that just happened. You come to a point as a poet where you realize, like, okay, it's time to take stock of what you've written, right? Look back on all the poems you've done and see if they coalesce or mesh together into some kind of book. So again, poetry comes a little bit more organically. Translations are, very specific, looking for a new voice, a new technique, some kind of new facet of Polish poetry even that I think would be nice to have in English. The same for essays and my critical writing. That's very, topic, subject, theme oriented, but poetry, very organic. There were a couple of reasons, and I'm actually very frank about it because, and I talk to my students about it as well. First of all, it's a wonderful way to learn how to write. Okay? When you translate, you learn how to write. As an aspiring poet, I really wanted to become a better poet. And I thought, okay, if I translate, I can really learn a lot about how to write a poem in English. A. B, it's much easier to break into print as a translator than as a poet. That's it's a kind of a sad fact, but or maybe not. Maybe it's not sad. Maybe just it is what it is. But that's very true. The world doesn't need more poets, but we do need but we do need more translators. And that's actually, well, at least that's been my case, that my translation work has been received better and with, more of kind of open arms than my original work. And then I guess the final reason would be to kind of expand the idea of Polish poetry, right? Because one of the things that we know as scholars of translation and complet, etc., is that the receiving field, right, the receiving literary market is very myopic and it's not very receptive to a lot of foreign voices, right? The market, for instance, in the US works on this idea of kind of a flavor of the month. There's a very cyclical nature to it, right? And when it comes to translating poetry and introducing new poets into that literary market that we have here in the States, most publishers want more of the same, if you will. They don't want different. They want more of the same. And Polish poetry has been tremendously successful and well received in the States. Miłosz, Szymborska, Herbert, Adam Zagajewski. I mean, these are poets who, maybe not most, but many American poets know their work, right? They've engaged with them as well. And that's a really tremendous thing. But in a way, anytime you have a successful, say, Polish or Russian, for that matter, poet who's been really well received and accepted by the literary marketplace and the literary establishment here in the US, the kind of negative aspect of that, if you will, I mean, it's a good problem to have, let's be honest. For a foreign poet to be successful in another language, that's a wonderful thing. Having said that, it's very important that we are cognizant of the fact that for every successful poet that is embraced in the States, there are many other poets who will never have that opportunity. And so pretty much all, with one exception, of the poets I've translated are my contemporaries. They're younger, well, not so young anymore, but younger Polish poets who, in some cases, write in the opposition to the classics of Polish poetry. And so, like I said earlier, the idea has also been to introduce these new voices, to also kind of showcase, like, hey, there are all these other voices, especially the younger ones who may be doing something different. But I would say that would be like the third reason. The first one, very selfishly, learning to write by translating. And then the second one is, how can I get into print and start having or establishing some kind of literary presence for myself? And then finally the one, hey, there are all these great Polish poets out there and we should know them because they're really great. And who says they're great? Well, I say so. I really like their work. So that would be the last of the three reasons I've mentioned. Well, as you may know, I write in Polish and in English, and that's a really hard question. I think I can't say I like all of them. In a way, I subscribe to the idea that books are like children. They grow up, they leave home, and they never come back. Once you publish a book, that book is in a way no longer yours. It belongs to the world. And generally speaking, I don't reread my work. Like, I sometimes forget what's in my book. Some of the poetry volumes I've done, I could not tell you like every single poem in there. I just don't remember anymore. So it is a tough question, and I'm evading it a little bit, because yeah, kind of like I like them all, I suppose. I mean, I wrote them. I mean, some are better than others, let's be honest. Some, there's a book out there that I wish I had not published, for instance, or I wish I had worked on it more. Let me speak maybe of a recent book I did. So Swimming Pool, it's a book that's part of the Object Lesson series, wonderful series that is put out by Bloomsbury Academic. And the idea behind the series is to uncover the hidden lives of ordinary objects. And because of my past as a swimmer, I've always wanted to write about that. I've always wanted to do maybe a memoir like piece, but I never wanted to be just a straight up memoir about my training or competing or all that. And so Object Lessons series is wonderful because the editors let me do both. Let me do a memoir, personal essay like, with some critical thinking, observations, etc. So in a way, the book embodies all my identities, because it's a very short book, but I wrote it as a critic, right? There's some scholarship in there. I wrote it as a former swimmer because there's a lot about swimming, the sport of swimming in there. And I wrote it as a, poet, creative writer, because the last chapter, called From Pool to Page, is all about my journey from, world rankings as a swimmer to, pages of literary magazines and whatnot. So in that sense, I kind of like that book because, again, I got to do the things that are important to me. I got to do scholarship. I got to do creative writing. I got to do poetry. I got to look at photographs and think about ideas. What is a pool, right? What is like an Olympic pool versus a kidney-shaped backyard pool, right? So yeah, that book is close to me, to my heart, if you will. And there are lots of other things I'm working on, but I'll leave it at that. The swimming pool is a cool little book.